Chapter 1 Quiz Review. Question 1. This question has two parts. First, answer part A and then answer part B. Part A. In Chapter 1, a number of significant things happened to Elie Wiesel and the other Jews of Saget. How did the Jews of Saget respond to these events? The correct answer is they showed continual optimism. If you remember on the PowerPoint review, we looked at the different events that happened throughout the course of Chapter 1, and we looked at the responses. For example, the very first event was the foreign Jews were expelled from Saget. And what was the response? The Jews of Saget were complacent and accepting of this. They were not alarmed. Moving on, we know that Moshe returned to warn the villagers, but we know that the villagers refused to listen. Next, German army soldiers lodged in villagers of Saget's houses. The villagers welcomed them as they believed they seemed pleasant and nice. Then, every Jew had to wear a yellow Star of David. The villagers were worried, but Elie's father encouraged them not to worry. So they're optimistic about these changes that happen. When the Jews were moved into the ghettos, their response was that they were happy to live amongst each other. Next, they were moved into smaller ghettos for 3 days, and they were still accepting of the situation. They thought it wasn't so bad. They still had hope. So they showed continual optimism. Part B, select the evidence from the text that best supports the answer in Part A. The correct answer is A. The barbed wire that encircled us like a wall did not fill us with real fear. In fact, we felt this was not a bad thing. We were entirely amongst ourselves. So supporting the graphic organizer that we just looked at, barbed wire has been moved around them, but instead of them being worried and concerned, they thought it was good. They get to stay together. They thought it was not a bad thing. Question 3. When the foreign Jews were deported, Elie hears a villager say, "What do you expect? That's war." What does this line reveal about the attitude of the people of Saget? The answer is C. They were indifferent and unwilling to understand the dangers of war. This is a continuous theme that we see throughout this first chapter. The Jews are warned and warned and warned again, and yet, like the last question, they have this continued optimism. Question 4. What effect does the line, "The race towards death had begun," have on the reader? The correct answer is D. It makes the reader feel alert to the dangers that lie ahead. Race towards death. Those are really stark, extreme words. The idea that it's this race to die, this race towards death, is really alerting to the reader, and it lets you know that bad things are going to happen. And because this is a historic text, it is a memoir, we know about the Holocaust and we know the tragedies that happened. Elie is deeply devoted to the Jewish faith. Which line from the text best shows his religious devotion? The correct answer is A. I looked at my house in which I had spent years seeking my God, fastening to hasten to the commitment to the Messiah, imagining what my life would be like later. It's identifying that he spent years seeking his God. Question 6. Read the line on page 10. First edict. Jews were prohibited from leaving their residences for 3 days under penalty of death. The definition of edict is an official order or proclamation issued by a person in authority. Which words from the line on page 10 help you understand the meaning of the word edict? B is the correct answer. If we use the word prohibited, and we look at the word or the phrase under penalty, we know that these are rules, these are issues, these are warnings, which would help us understand what edict means. It's an official order. That means it's really serious. And it's issued by a person in authority. You're prohibited, given a penalty if you don't follow this order, this rule, this law. Question 7 requires you to read the opening paragraph. Then, based on the selection, what can be inferred about Moshe's character? The correct answer is D. He is a hard-working individual who keeps to himself. They call him Moishe the Beadle, as if his entire life he had never had a surname. He was a jack of all trades. When we talk about a jack of all trades, that means somebody that knows a lot of different skills, that they quite easily and quite effectively can take on many different roles and perform many different functions. So this would certainly show that he was hardworking. He also stayed out of people's way. He bothered no one. And he mastered the art of rendering himself insignificant and invisible. These all lend to the idea that he keeps himself to himself. Question 8. Read the excerpt from page 8. Part A. What feelings and ideas from the perspective of the Jews of Saget does the author most likely hope to communicate to the reader with these paragraphs? The correct answer is going to be C. Happiness, joy, and hope. Question 9 focuses on the same paragraphs, and it asks you to select words and phrases that best support the answer to Part A. The correct answer is B. Splendid news from the Russian front. Trees were in bloom. This gives the idea of hope and happiness and joy. Splendid news. The trees were in bloom. When trees are blossoming, that's a signal, a symbolism of new life, of hope, of new things to come. The spring in itself means rebirth. This is a time for happiness, for joy, endless possibilities. Read the following paragraph from page 8. Annihilated an entire people? Wipe out a population dispersed throughout so many nations? So many millions of people? By what means? In the middle of the 20th century? How does the author's use of punctuation in the final paragraph continue to express how the Jews of Saget were feeling during the spring of 1944? C is the correct answer. The use of question marks emphasizes the absurd nature of Hitler's quest and the disbelief that it could really happen. They're asking rhetorical questions. Annihilate an entire people? How could you possibly think that that could happen? Wipe out a population dispersed throughout so many nations? That sounds crazy. How could somebody possibly do that? So many millions of people? By what means? In the middle of the 20th century? This is why Hitler was able to get away with this, because people just didn't believe it, because who could believe that this would really happen? It emphasizes how absurd this is. This is crazy, and yet it did happen.